So I'm always looking for articles that maybe point towards when an economic collapse could occur and what countries are doing to stave off a collapse or to reorder the world in their favor so that they can become the next world reserve currency country or the next superpower. And I think this article is a great one that gives us an example of what some other countries, in this case Russia, is doing. Hey guys, everything new under the sun. I think an economic collapse is one of the things that catapults us into end time Bible prophecy. I think maybe that's the big reason why you see no Western countries, Western leaders named in Ezekiel 38, for example, or Isaiah 17, or Psalm 83, or any of the big end time Bible prophecy scriptures. This one is about Russia basically gearing up, getting itself ready for an economic collapse. I don't see any other reason why they would be doing this. If they thought the U.S. dollar was going to go on forever, then I don't think they'd be bothering with this. They'd be building their country, building other cities, etc. Instead, they're stockpiling gold like never before, and they're dumping U.S. dollars like never before. This is ZeroHedge.com. Russia buys 600,000 ounces of gold in May after dumping half of the U.S. Treasuries in April. So in April, they dumped U.S. Treasuries, U.S. dollars. In May, they bought 600,000 ounces of gold. That's a lot of gold. Russia added 600 ounces of gold to gold reserves in May. Holdings of U.S. government debt slashed in half to $48 billion in April. That's because U.S. debt is worthless, and the U.S. dollar keeps getting more worthless every day. The Federal Reserve has the inflation target of 2%. That is the devaluing of the U.S. dollar. So every dollar that a foreign country owns, even in terms of debt, means that the value of that debt decreases if it's worth something in the first place. 2% a year if the Federal Reserve can keep its 2% inflation target. So all of the quote-unquote money, the U.S. dollars that every other country holds, is worth less and less every year. Same as if you keep your money in the bank. If you just leave it sitting in the bank and the interest, and there's no interest on it, it will lose its value 2% a year. You will be able to buy 2% less goods and services with it every year, all things being equal. Trump is increasing the national debt by another 6% to $21.1 trillion in less than 18 months. So he was kind of left with a bad economy. He can't just start cutting things because that would trigger a complete and total economic collapse. So he's spending some money here, trying to get things kickstarted, so maybe that he can rein in the economy going forward. I mean, I don't know if that's his plan or not. I think he would be a great person to pull the U.S. through an economic collapse, work them through a bankruptcy, and where they could still stay standing on the other side, but they certainly wouldn't be a superpower after that. And I think the timing of Trump, specifically because he has a long history of, governing or leading over a bankruptcy situation with all his companies. It's fascinating that God put him in place for a time such as this. And that's very biblical. God puts all leaders in positions. He put Obama in position for 8 years for such a time as this, for specific reasons. God raises people to power, and he takes them out of power according to his will and according to where he wants things to go. Well, Asian nations are accumulating gold as a shield against dollar devaluation, inflation rate, and trade wars. Russia dumps treasuries for gold in a trade war. China and others may do the same. Here is the infographic. Russian central bank gold reserves. You can see month-on-month change, and the latest change is 600,000 ounces. That's what you see on the right-hand side there. The number of ounces, millions of troy ounces. It shows there. So incredible increase, a steady increase for a long time here. At the bottom of it, you can see the monthly change. So in 2006, there wasn't much going on, and you can just see the activity just increasing. Are they gearing up because they know something is going to happen, or are they getting ready to trigger an economic collapse? What China and Russia could do is build their gold and silver reserves so that they can wield economic warfare or unload a weapon of mass economic destruction by deciding together to dump U.S. Treasuries all at the same time, which would collapse the dollar. They'd be left standing because they have gold reserves, and the question is out there as to how much gold Fort Knox actually holds, or the Federal Reserve, the basement in the Federal Reserve. How much gold does the U.S. actually hold anymore? Or had they sold most of it off? Most countries are clawing back the gold that the Federal Reserve is holding for them. Well, Bloomberg and Reuters and other media are now reporting that Russia dumped treasuries in a major way in April, and today comes news that Russia bought another 600,000 ounces. It is not just Russia that is diversifying into gold in recent months and years. India, Turkey, Mexico, Iran, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Mongolia, and of course China have been increasing their gold reserves. Why are they doing this if they don't see some sort of economic crisis coming, if they don't see on the horizon a change in the world superpower and the world fiat currency status? Well, in part, this is apparently due to Trump's erratic and risky economic policies. We're moving into a multipolar world in which China becomes a more dominant player, and Trump is exacerbating the trend. Remember, with all the trade tariffs talks going on right now, one of the trigger points, if not the trigger point, if you watch my video about 1929, the trigger point of 1929, the Great Depression, the biggest economic collapse in the history of the world, which is going to be overshadowed by huge amounts by this next global economic collapse. It was triggered by tariffs, as traders, as tariff laws were put into effect a couple of months before the economic collapse, and traders started seeing the writing on the wall and started pulling out, started getting scared because of the tariffs and what might come of it. This is a U.S. Treasury securities held by Russia in USD. So in 2015, 2016, it was steadily increasing, actually, the treasuries. But in 2018, look at the major sell-off in the blue line there for Russia selling treasuries. The risk for the U.S. and global economy is that if trade wars intensify with China, Russia and other nations then this trend may deepen. This would likely lead to a low dollar, higher interest rates, and much higher inflation. In Pakistan right now, inflation is skyrocketing. They've had to increase interest rates 3 times. I believe it's just this year. So countries around the world are falling into economic collapse. The only reason the U.S. is not there yet is because they can print money without impunity. They can print money out of thin air, print U.S. dollars. It doesn't, it costs maybe a cent for every dollar. I don't know what the actual price of printing the dollar is, but there's no value backing it. There's no hard asset backing it like gold or silver. And so they're the only country in the world, effectively, that can print money out of thin air without requiring any backing to it. Well, the end of the dollar reserve standard and petrodollar and the flow of gold from the west to the east is what what this means is something we covered in the latest Globalnomics podcast, and you can check out the article. The link will be in the description. But what this leads to basically is that the world is getting prepared for an economic collapse. These countries know that a shift in power is coming, and all they need to do to position themselves well is to have a good, solid, significant gold portfolio, and more than that, not just a portfolio, but actual gold reserves, gold stacked up in a vault somewhere where you can access it. And that means you have real wealth. That means you have real hard assets as opposed to just being on the stock market. The U.S. has less and less actual real wealth and more just stock market and assumed wealth by company valuations and such. And so in a hard time when there's an economic crisis or pullback, It's going to be countries like Russia and China, which are hoarding gold and silver. These are the ones that are going to come out on top. So this is a significant indicator that things are heading towards the last days, and I think it's an indicator that we will see an economic collapse, and this is going to be part of the end time scenario. Otherwise, these countries wouldn't be doing this if they thought everything was awesome, and if they weren't planning any sort of economic attack, then they wouldn't be building their gold reserves, or they'd be using their money for something else. But these countries want to be the next superpower. These countries want to be the next world government, or have a part in there. And the country that's going to be left, that's going to have the most power when the economic collapse occurs, is going to be the one with the most gold reserves. That's how it always happens. That's how it's happened the last 6,000 years. The country with the most gold is the next superpower country. That's why the U.S. is a superpower country, because after was it World War I or World War II? My history is not the best. But all the countries moved, it must have been World War II, all the countries moved their reserves over to the U.S. In protection. And so the U.S. held a lot of gold for many other countries. And out of that, also, all the other countries, Britain, for example, had very hard economic times. And so they were not a superpower. The other countries were still becoming industrialized nations. And so they didn't have a lot of power at that time, and the U.S. was booming. So the U.S. economy and the U.S. as a country had the most money left over after World War II, and was in a position industrially to take over the world power status. And that's where they are, and that's why we are where we are right now. In the U.S. anyways. I'm in Canada, but some of that economic prosperity has shifted, has shown itself across borders in several other Western countries. But that's why the world sees the U.S. greenback as the world reserve currency. That's why it's agreed upon, and that's why it's used for most trading in U.S. in barrels of oil and these sorts of things. But countries like Russia are moving away from using the U.S. dollar to buy oil and to buy and sell things on the world market. And this is heading towards the collapse of the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency. This is what we see coming. This is a part of end-time Bible prophecy. And I think a worldwide economic collapse is one of the only things, nuclear weapons aside, a nuclear weapon I don't think would cause as much damage as a worldwide economic collapse, which would move us directly and straight in within a matter of days into the end-time prophetic scenarios that we see in the Bible. So thanks for watching, guys. Significant stuff, I think, and something to be watching, something to be prepared for. You've heard it in many other videos. Be prepared. Get gold and silver. Get food and water. Be prepared for all eventualities. And ultimately, make sure you know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, because He's coming back soon. We have less than 10 years to go before the second coming of the Lord. We have less than 3 years, I believe, to the start of the 7-year tribulation. So you need to be prepared. You need to have your heart right with God. Do you know where you're going? Do you know that you're going to heaven when you die? That's the decision you need to make. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video.